Maya Johnson pressed her back against the cool marble wall of the mansion's grand hallway, clutching the feather duster to her chest as her heart hammered against her ribs. The sound of expensive leather shoes clicking across the polished floor grew louder with each passing second. She had been working as a maid in the Sterling mansion for exactly 3 months, and, in all that time, she had never once encountered the mysterious billionaire who owned this palace of glass and gold. Richard Sterling was a name whispered in hushed tones throughout the household staff. The other maids spoke of him like he was some kind of ghost, appearing and disappearing without warning, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and the echo of barked orders to his personal assistant. Maya had seen his face countless times in business magazines scattered throughout the house, his steel-gray eyes staring back at her from glossy covers, but she had never expected to meet him face to face in the dimly lit corridor at 11 o'clock at night. She had been finishing her evening rounds, checking that all the windows were locked and the expensive artwork was properly secured, when she heard the front door slam with enough force to rattle the crystal chandelier hanging 3 stories above. Maya knew she should have retreated to the servants' quarters immediately, but something about the angry footsteps and the sound of glass breaking in the distance made her freeze in place. Now, as those footsteps approached her hiding spot, Maya realized she had made a terrible mistake. Her employment contract was very clear about one thing: the household staff were to remain invisible during Mr. Sterling's visits to the estate. She was supposed to be like a shadow, cleaning and maintaining the house without ever crossing paths with the man who signed her paychecks. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her, and Maya held her breath until her lungs burned. Through her tightly closed eyelids, she could sense a presence looming over her, and she wondered if this was how her short-lived employment would end. 3 months of steady work, 3 months of sending money back to her sick mother in Detroit, 3 months of hope that maybe things were finally turning around for the Johnson family. "What are you doing here?" The voice was deep and rough, like gravel mixed with whiskey, and it sent an involuntary shiver down Maya's spine. She opened her eyes slowly and found herself staring into the face she had seen in so many magazines, except this version was real and human and somehow more intimidating than any photograph could capture. Richard Sterling stood at least 6 feet tall, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was askew, and there was something wild and desperate in his expression that made Maya's throat go dry. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast hallway. "I was just finishing my rounds. I didn't know you were coming home tonight." Richard studied her face with an intensity that made Maya want to disappear into the marble behind her. His gray eyes swept over her dark skin, her worn uniform, her carefully braided hair, and something flickered across his features that she couldn't quite identify. For a moment, the anger seemed to drain from his expression, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. "You're new," he said, and it wasn't a question. "What's your name?" "Maya Johnson, sir." "Johnson." He repeated the name slowly, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "Where are you from, Maya Johnson?" The question caught her off guard. In all her previous jobs, employers had never shown the slightest interest in her personal life. She was hired to clean and cook and remain invisible, not to make small talk with billionaires in expensive hallways. "Detroit, sir. Born and raised." Something shifted in Richard's expression again, and Maya noticed his hands clench into fists at his sides. The air in the hallway seemed to grow thicker, charged with an electricity she didn't understand. "Detroit," he murmured, and there was something broken in the way he said it. "Tell me, Maya from Detroit, do you have family there?" Maya nodded carefully, unsure where this conversation was leading but afraid to say the wrong thing. "My mother, sir. She's been sick for a while now. That's why I took this job, to help with her medical bills." The change in Richard Sterling was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from his face so quickly that Maya thought he might collapse right there in front of her. He stumbled backward, one hand reaching out to steady himself against the wall, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "Your mother," he repeated, his voice now barely a whisper. "What's your mother's name?" Maya hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her that this conversation had taken a dangerous turn, that she should excuse herself and retreat to her room before things went any further. But there was something in Richard Sterling's eyes now, something desperate and pleading that made it impossible for her to walk away. "Grace," she said softly. "Grace Johnson." "Well, Grace Williams was her maiden name, but she kept Johnson after my father died." The sound Richard made was unlike anything Maya had ever heard before. It was part sob, part gasp, part something that might have been her name, but distorted by 25 years of guilt and regret. He pressed his back against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the cold marble floor, his expensive suit bunching around him like the costume of a broken king. "Grace Williams," he whispered, and the name seemed to hang in the air between them like a ghost. "Oh God, what have I done?" Maya felt her knees go weak as she watched this powerful man crumble before her eyes. She had no idea what was happening, but every fiber of her being told her that her mother's name had just changed everything. The feather duster fell from her numb fingers and clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the hallway like a gunshot. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, though the question felt absurd given the circumstances. "Should I call someone? A doctor?" Richard looked up at her then, and Maya saw tears streaming down his cheeks. This was not the cold, calculating businessman from the magazine covers. This was a man haunted by ghosts, destroyed by secrets that had been eating him alive for decades. "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No doctors. Just sit with me for a moment." Against every rule of proper employer-employee conduct, Maya found herself sinking to the floor beside him. The marble was cold against her legs, but she barely noticed. All her attention was focused on the man beside her, the stranger who somehow knew her mother's maiden name, who had reacted to the mention of Grace Williams like he'd been struck by lightning. "Mr. Sterling," she said carefully, "how do you know my mother?" Richard closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that Maya had to lean closer to hear him. "We were young," he said. "So young and so stupid. I thought I had all the time in the world to make things right, to find her and explain. But time has a way of slipping through your fingers like sand, and, before you know it, 25 years have passed and you're sitting on the floor of your mansion, face to face with the daughter of the woman you never stopped loving." Maya's world tilted on its axis. The words hit her like physical blows, each one more impossible than the last. Her mother had never mentioned knowing anyone named Richard Sterling. In fact, Grace Johnson had rarely spoken about her past at all, deflecting Maya's questions with vague answers about wanting to focus on the future rather than dwelling on yesterday. "I don't understand," Maya whispered. "My mother never mentioned you. I've never heard the name Richard Sterling in my life." "She wouldn't have," Richard said with a bitter laugh. "Not after what I did to her. Not after I chose money over love, obligation over heart. She probably hoped she'd never have to hear my name again." The hallway fell silent except for the distant ticking of an antique grandfather clock somewhere in the depths of the house. Maya's mind raced as she tried to process what she was hearing. Her mother, the woman who had raised her single-handedly after her father's death, who had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's education, had once known this billionaire well enough that the mere mention of her name could reduce him to tears. "What did you do?" Maya asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. Richard opened his eyes and turned to look at her directly. In the dim light of the hallway, Maya could see herself reflected in his gray irises, and, for a moment, she felt like she was looking at a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the picture she had of her life. "I broke her heart," he said simply. "I made promises I couldn't keep, painted pictures of a future that my family would never allow. And, when push came to shove, when I had to choose between the empire my father had built and the woman I loved, I chose the empire." Maya felt tears burning behind her own eyes now. The pain in Richard's voice was so raw, so genuine, that she could almost feel it radiating from his skin. But, beneath her sympathy was a growing anger, a fury on behalf of the mother she loved more than anything in the world. "She loved you," Maya said, and it wasn't a question. She could hear it in the way he spoke about her mother, could see it in the devastation written across his features. "She loved me," Richard confirmed. "And I loved her. God help me, I never stopped loving her. Even when I married Patricia, even when I built this life that looks so perfect from the outside, there was always a part of my heart that belonged to Grace Williams. The mention of marriage sent another shock wave through Maya's system. She had done her research before taking this job, had read about Richard Sterling's wife, the socialite Patricia Manning Sterling, who had died in a car accident 5 years ago. The newspapers had painted their relationship as the perfect love story, the merger of two powerful families that had resulted in a partnership both personal and professional. "You married someone else," Maya said, her voice flat. "I married someone else," Richard agreed. "Someone my family approved of, someone who came from the right background, someone who would help expand the Sterling empire instead of threatening it with scandal." "What scandal?" Richard's laugh was hollow and bitter. "A white billionaire's son in love with a black woman from Detroit in the late 1990s? My father would have disowned me. The board of directors would have staged a revolt. The society pages would have had a field day." Maya felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. She had grown up knowing that the world could be a cruel and unfair place, especially for people who looked like her, but hearing it laid out so starkly, so matter-of-factly, made her stomach churn with rage. "So you threw away love for money," she said, making no effort to hide the disgust in her voice. "I threw away love for cowardice," Richard corrected. "Money was just the excuse I told myself to make it easier to sleep at night. The truth is, I was a 25-year-old coward who was too afraid of disappointing my father to fight for what really mattered. And my mother paid the price." "Your mother paid the price," he agreed. "And, apparently, she's still paying it." Maya thought about her mother lying in the hospital bed back in Detroit, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed 24 hours a day. Grace Johnson had been diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer 6 months ago, despite never smoking a day in her life. The doctors said it was just bad luck, genetics, environmental factors beyond anyone's control. The treatment was expensive, even with insurance, and Maya had been working 3 jobs before she found the position at the Sterling mansion. "She's dying," Maya said, the words falling from her lips like stones. "The cancer is spreading faster than the doctors expected. That's why I took this job, to pay for experimental treatments that might buy her more time." Richard's face crumpled again, and he buried his head in his hands. "Dying," he repeated. "Grace is dying, and I'm sitting here in my ivory tower, completely oblivious. What kind of monster does that make me?" "The kind who made his choice 25 years ago," Maya said, her voice harder than she intended. They sat in silence for several long minutes, the weight of 25 years of separation and regret pressing down on them like a physical force. Maya found herself studying Richard's profile in the dim light, looking for any trace of the man her mother must have fallen in love with all those years ago. Beneath the expensive clothes and the silver hair and the lines of stress, she could almost see him, young, passionate, full of dreams and possibilities. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said finally. Richard nodded without lifting his head. "If you loved her so much, why didn't you ever try to find her? 25 years is a long time. You're one of the richest men in America. Surely you could have hired investigators, made some effort to track her down." Richard was quiet for so long that Maya wondered if he had heard her question. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I tried," he said. "God knows I tried. But Grace disappeared completely after we broke up. I hired private investigators, used every resource at my disposal, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. No forwarding address, no contact information, no trace of where she had gone or what name she might be using." "She went back to Detroit," Maya said. "Back to her family. I looked in Detroit. I looked everywhere in Detroit. But I was looking for Grace Williams, not Grace Johnson." The pieces clicked into place in Maya's mind like tumblers in a lock. Her mother had married Maya's father, Thomas Johnson, barely a year after moving back to Detroit. Maya had always assumed it was a whirlwind romance, but now she wondered if her mother had been running towards something or running away from it. "She married my father pretty quickly," Maya said quietly. "A good man, I hope." "The best," Maya confirmed. "He loved her completely, loved me like I was his own flesh and blood even though I came along later. He died when I was 12, heart attack, but those 12 years were the happiest I ever saw my mother." "Good," Richard said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. She deserved happiness. She deserved a man who would choose her every single day. Unlike you. Unlike me. Maya felt exhausted suddenly, drained by the emotional weight of the conversation. Her comfortable world had been turned upside down in the span of 30 minutes, and she wasn't sure how to process any of it. The man sitting beside her wasn't just her employer anymore, he was a living connection to her mother's past, a window into a part of Grace Johnson's life that Maya had never known existed. I should go, Maya said, starting to push herself to her feet. It's late, and you probably need time to process all of this. Wait, Richard said quickly, reaching out to catch her arm. Please. There's something else. Something you need to see. Maya paused, every instinct telling her that whatever Richard wanted to show her would only make this impossible situation more complicated. But the desperation in his voice, the pleading in his eyes, made it impossible for her to walk away. What? She asked. Richard struggled to his feet, his expensive suit wrinkled beyond repair. He straightened his shoulders and tried to compose himself, but Maya could see the cracks in his facade now. This man who commanded boardrooms and built empires was barely holding himself together. Follow me, he said simply. Against her better judgment, Maya found herself walking beside Richard Sterling through the vast corridors of his mansion. They passed room after room of opulent furniture and priceless artwork, climbing a grand staircase that seemed to spiral upward forever. Maya had cleaned these halls dozens of times, but she had never been to the private wing of the house, the section that was strictly off-limits to household staff. They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door at the end of a long hallway. Richard's hand trembled as he reached for the brass handle, and Maya noticed that his breathing had become shallow again. This is my private study, he said without looking at her. No one has been in here except me for the past 5 years. Not the cleaning staff, not my assistant, no one. He pushed open the door and stepped aside to let Maya enter first. The room was smaller than she had expected, more intimate than the grand spaces that dominated the rest of the house. It was clearly a place where Richard spent a lot of time, with worn leather chairs, stacks of papers, and the lingering scent of coffee and expensive cigars. But it was the wall opposite the door that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. The entire wall was covered with photographs. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all featuring a young black woman with smooth skin, bright eyes, and a smile that could light up the world. Maya recognized that smile instantly, had seen it countless times throughout her childhood, though it had grown rarer in recent years as illness and financial stress took their toll. Her mother. The wall was covered with pictures of her mother. Oh my God, Maya whispered, taking a step closer to the wall. The photographs showed Grace Williams at different ages, in different settings, captured in moments of joy and laughter that Maya had never seen before. There was Grace at what looked like a college party, her head thrown back in laughter. Grace on a beach somewhere, her hair blowing in the wind. Grace in formal wear, looking elegant and sophisticated beyond her years. And, in many of the photographs, a younger version of Richard Sterling stood beside her, his arm around her waist, looking at her with an expression of such pure adoration that it made Maya's chest ache. I kept them, Richard said quietly from behind her. All these years, through my marriage, through everything that came after, I kept these pictures. Patricia never knew about this room, never knew about the wall. It was my secret, my shrine to the life I should have lived. Maya moved closer to the photographs, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. In the center of the wall, larger than all the others, was a professional portrait that took her breath away. Her mother stood in a flowing white dress, her hair styled in elegant waves, her face glowing with happiness. She looked like a bride, Maya realized with a start. She looked like a woman in love, preparing for the most important day of her life. When was this taken? Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. 3 weeks before I broke her heart, Richard said. 3 weeks before I chose duty over love and destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. Maya felt tears streaming down her cheeks now, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from the photographs. This was her mother's secret life, the chapter that Grace had never shared with her daughter. This was the love story that had been buried beneath years of practical concerns and everyday struggles. She was going to marry you, Maya said, and again it wasn't a question. We had picked out rings. We had chosen a date. We had started making plans for a future together, despite all the obstacles we knew we would face. What happened? Richard moved to stand beside her, his own eyes fixed on the photographs as if seeing them for the first time. My father happened. The board of directors happened. Reality happened. His voice was thick with regret. They threatened to cut me off completely if I went through with the marriage. They said they would destroy her, use their influence to make sure she never found work anywhere, ever. They painted pictures of scandal and disgrace that would follow us for the rest of our lives. So you believed them? I was 25 years old and terrified, Richard said. I had never lived without the Sterling name, never existed without the family money and influence. I convinced myself that I was protecting her, that she would be better off without me and all the complications I would bring to her life. Maya turned away from the wall and faced him directly. Did you ever think to ask her what she wanted? Did you ever consider that maybe she was strong enough to handle whatever your family threw at her? Every single day for the past 25 years, Richard replied. But, by then, it was too late. By then, she was gone, and I was married to someone else, and the moment had passed forever. Maya felt a fresh wave of anger wash over her, but beneath it was something else, a strange kind of pity for this man who had built an empire but lost his soul in the process. She never got over you, Maya said, the words coming out before she could stop them. She never said your name, never talked about her past, but there were times when she would get this distant look in her eyes, like she was remembering something beautiful and painful at the same time. I always wondered what put that look on her face. Richard closed his eyes and gripped the back of a nearby chair. Don't, he whispered. Please don't tell me that. I can't bear the thought that I caused her a lifetime of pain. Then, why are you telling me all of this? Maya demanded, her voice rising. Why are you showing me these pictures, confessing your sins like this is some kind of deathbed conversion? My mother is dying, Mr. Sterling. She's lying in a hospital bed 3 states away, fighting for every breath, and you're here in your mansion, surrounded by photographs of a woman you claim to love but were too cowardly to fight for. What do you want from me? Forgiveness? Understanding? What? The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood frozen by the chair, his knuckles white from gripping the leather so tightly. Maya could see the battle playing out across his features, the war between the man he had been and the man he wished he could have become. I want to see her, he said finally, his voice so quiet that Maya almost missed it. I want to tell her I'm sorry. I want to explain why I did what I did, even though I know there's no excuse. I want her to know that not a single day has passed that I haven't thought about her, haven't regretted the choice I made. Maya stared at him in disbelief. After 25 years of silence, after a lifetime of missed opportunities, he wanted to waltz back into her mother's life just as it was ending. Absolutely not, Maya said firmly. You lost the right to see her 25 years ago when you walked away. You don't get to ease your conscience now that she's dying. Please, Richard said, and there was naked desperation in his voice. I know I have no right to ask, but, please. I have money, resources. I can help with the medical bills, with the treatments. I can make sure she has the best care available. You think this is about money? Maya's voice was sharp with anger. You think you can just throw cash at the situation and make everything better? No, I know it's not about money. But maybe if I can help, if I can do something useful, then maybe this meeting between us wasn't just another cosmic joke at my expense. Maya wanted to refuse him outright, wanted to tell him that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, that some chances couldn't be recovered. But, as she looked at the photographs covering the wall, as she saw the evidence of a love that had survived 25 years of separation and regret, she found herself wavering. Her mother was dying. The experimental treatments were expensive and, probably futile. The doctors had been honest about Grace's prognosis, months, not years, and probably fewer months than anyone wanted to admit. Did Grace deserve to know that the man she had loved and lost was still alive, still thinking about her? Did she deserve the chance to find closure, to say the things that had been left unsaid for a quarter of a century? Or would seeing Richard Sterling again only cause her more pain, more heartbreak in the final chapter of her life? Maya looked at the photographs one more time, studying her mother's young face, the joy and hope and boundless love captured in those frozen moments. Grace Williams had been a different person then, someone full of dreams and possibilities, someone who believed in happy endings. "I need time to think," Maya said finally. "This is too big, too complicated. I can't make this decision tonight." Richard nodded, relief evident in his posture. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But, Maya, please don't wait too long. If your mother is as sick as you say." "I know," Maya interrupted. "Believe me, I know exactly how little time we have left." As she walked toward the door, Maya felt the weight of 25 years of secrets pressing down on her shoulders. Her quiet life as a maid in a billionaire's mansion had just become infinitely more complicated, and she had no idea how to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. At the doorway, she turned back to look at Richard one more time. He stood in the center of his shrine to lost love, surrounded by memories of the woman he had given up for gold and social standing. "For what it's worth," Maya said softly, "I think you made the wrong choice." "So do I," Richard replied. "So do I." Maya didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling and replaying every word of her conversation with Richard Sterling. The darkness around her felt heavy with the weight of secrets and revelations, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's young face smiling back at her from those photographs. At sunrise, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She called in sick to work, something she had never done in her 3 months of employment. Then, she bought a plane ticket to Detroit using the emergency credit card she had sworn she would only use for her mother's medical expenses. By noon, she was sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her mother's hospital bed, watching Grace Johnson sleep fitfully under the harsh fluorescent lights. The cancer had stolen so much from her mother over the past 6 months. Grace had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her once vibrant skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her beautiful hair had fallen out in clumps during the chemotherapy treatments. But, even in her weakened state, Maya could still see traces of the woman from Richard's photographs, the high cheekbones, the elegant curve of her neck, the stubborn set of her jaw that had carried her through decades of single motherhood. "Baby girl?" Grace's voice was hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed just that morning. "What are you doing here? I thought you had to work." Maya had practiced what she would say during the entire flight from New York to Detroit, but now that she was here, face to face with her dying mother, all her carefully rehearsed words seemed inadequate. "Mama," she began, taking Grace's thin hand in her own. "I need to ask you about something. About your past, before you married Daddy." Grace's eyes sharpened with alertness despite the pain medication coursing through her system. "What about my past?" "I need you to tell me about Richard Sterling." The change in Grace Johnson was immediate and dramatic. Her face went completely white, her breathing became rapid and shallow, and she tried to pull her hand away from Maya's grip. The heart monitor beside the bed began beeping faster, and Maya worried that a nurse might come rushing in to see what was wrong. "Where did you hear that name?" Grace whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment surrounding them. "He's my employer, Mama. I work in his house." Grace struggled to sit up in the bed, her eyes wide with something that looked like terror. "No," she said firmly. "No, you quit that job right now. You pack your things and you leave that house and you never look back." "Mama, please," I said no. Grace's voice carried more strength than it had in months. "You don't understand, Maya. You don't know what kind of man he is, what he's capable of." Maya felt her heart breaking as she watched her mother's distress. This wasn't how she had imagined this conversation would go. She had expected surprise, maybe sadness, perhaps even relief that old secrets could finally be shared. She hadn't expected fear. "He told me about you," Maya said gently. "He told me that you two were in love once, that you were going to get married." Grace's laugh was bitter and harsh. "Love," she repeated. "Is that what he called it? Did he tell you how that love story ended, baby girl? Did he tell you what he did to me? He said he chose his family's money over you. He said he was a coward. A coward. Grace shook her head slowly. That's a nice way to put it. A clean way to describe what really happened. Maya squeezed her mother's hand tighter. Then, tell me what really happened. Tell me your side of the story. Grace was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the window where Detroit's skyline was barely visible through the smog and distance. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 25 years of buried pain. I was 23 when I met him, Grace began. Fresh out of college, working as a receptionist at a law firm downtown. I had dreams then, Maya. Big dreams about becoming a lawyer myself, about making something of my life, about proving that a girl from the projects could rise above her circumstances. Maya had never heard these details before. Her mother had rarely spoken about her college years, deflecting questions with vague comments about the past being less important than the future. Richard was 25, already being groomed to take over his father's business empire. He came to the law firm for meetings, something about acquiring a smaller company, and I was the first person he saw when he walked through those doors. Grace's expression softened slightly at the memory. He was so handsome, Maya. Not just physically, though he was certainly that. But, he had this energy about him, this intensity, like he could move mountains if he set his mind to it. You fell in love, Maya said softly. We both did. Hard and fast and completely. He started finding excuses to come to the law firm, even after his business was finished. He would bring me coffee, flowers, little gifts that probably cost more than I made in a month. He told me I was beautiful, that I was smart, that I deserved everything good the world had to offer. Grace paused, her breathing becoming labored. Maya reached for the water cup beside the bed, helping her mother take small sips through the bendable straw. He introduced me to a different world, Grace continued. Expensive restaurants, Broadway shows, weekend trips to places I had only read about in magazines. For 6 months, I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. He talked about our future together, about the children we would have, about the life we would build. What changed? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. His father found out. Grace's voice turned cold. William Sterling was a powerful man, Maya, and a ruthless one. He didn't just disapprove of his son's relationship with a black woman from the wrong side of town, he saw it as a direct threat to everything the Sterling family represented. Maya felt her stomach clench with dread. What did he do? At first, he tried the gentle approach. He offered me money to disappear, a substantial sum that would have paid for law school and left me comfortable for years. When I refused, when I told him that Richard and I were planning to get married, he decided to play hardball. Grace's hand began to tremble in Maya's grip, and the heart monitor's beeping increased again. Maya could see that reliving these memories was taking a physical toll on her mother, but she needed to hear the rest of the story. William Sterling was a man who understood leverage, Grace continued. He understood that everyone had pressure points, weaknesses that could be exploited. He did his research on me, on my family, on everyone I cared about. What kind of research? He found out that my younger brother, Marcus, had been arrested for drug possession. It was a minor charge, marijuana, the kind of thing that might have resulted in probation or community service for a white kid from the suburbs. But Marcus was black and poor, and Mr. Sterling made sure the prosecutor knew that the Sterling family was very interested in seeing justice done. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. He used your brother against you. Marcus was facing 5 years in prison for something that should have been a slap on the wrist. William Sterling made it very clear that my brother's fate depended entirely on my willingness to disappear from his son's life. Grace's voice broke slightly. He also made it clear that if I ever tried to contact Richard again, if I ever told anyone about our relationship, Marcus wouldn't survive his first month in prison. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place now, painting a picture that was far darker and more sinister than anything Richard had told Maya the night before. This wasn't just a story about a young man choosing money over love, this was a story about power and intimidation, about a father who was willing to destroy an innocent woman to protect his family's image. So you broke up with Richard to save Marcus, Maya said. I tried to tell Richard what his father was doing, But William had anticipated that. He had his son convinced that I was just a gold digger who had been playing a long game, trying to trap him into marriage for financial gain. He showed Richard fabricated evidence, bank records that had been doctored to make it look like I had been receiving payments from rival companies. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes. Richard believed it? Richard wanted to believe it, Grace said bitterly. Maybe not consciously, but, deep down, I think part of him was relieved to have an excuse to walk away. The pressure from his family was enormous, and the idea that I had been deceiving him all along made it easier for him to justify choosing the path of least resistance. But, you loved him, Maya said. How could you just let him believe those lies? Grace's laugh was hollow and heartbreaking. What choice did I have? Marcus was sitting in a jail cell, and every day I waited to tell the truth was another day my baby brother was in danger. William Sterling made it very clear that if I fought back, if I tried to prove my innocence or expose his tactics, he would make sure Marcus disappeared completely. Maya thought about her uncle Marcus, her mother's younger brother.